Hey everybody, I am here with Steve from RetroTech, live in person. This isn't a green screen, we're actually right here. And we are 2 years late for this interview.
2 years, I can't believe it. The world almost prevented it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was funny because I'd been talking to you a few times before, and then I knew we were going to meet up at that meetup thing. And then I talked to you there, and I was like, oh, well, we're going to meet up in like a month or two anyway. And then 3 or 4 months later, the world shut down. So a very belated in-person interview that we should have been doing a while back. But unlucky for you, since there's been this much time, there's been that many more CRTs accumulated that I just drove down here.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's okay. That's all right. We like it.
Yeah, so how you been, man? I know you've been up to a bunch of cool
Been
stuff.
great. Can't complain like you. I just got done with a pretty extensive move. I lived in one place prior to this, one house for 13 years, which was the longest stint in my adult life, living in one spot. And then moving here, you get, and you're like remembering the stuff that you packed that you thought was important 13 years ago, and then you never saw it till you moved out. So that was a lot of fun going through that stuff. But yeah, just getting kind of in the groove from moving. That's been.
I know the feeling, and moving. I moved so many times in the past few years because I would do like 5 or 6 years at a clip in a different place. But when I moved to the city the first time, stuff got split between storage areas, every friend's house that I know, and then the apartment. And then it went to an office and a different apartment, and then all in the same apartment. And now all of this stuff is starting to come together, and I'm seeing boxes that I haven't seen in 6 years that I'm just like, I wish I'd known I had this. Like, how many times did I go for this? Didn't have it. I probably bought 3 of the same thing. So
Yeah, that's a common problem. I'm always looking for something like, I just saw that. Because now I moved, and I'm like, I just saw that. But I'm like, honestly, I have no idea where it is right now. Or the opposite, like you say, you find it, and you're really happy because you did find it, and you get to use it, and you're just like, wow. So there's been a lot of both of that stuff.
Did you find anything real cool that you forgot you had?
Actually, yeah, I was laughing. So my old shop, anybody who's watched my channel for a while will know it was just a 2-car garage that was a little bit oversized. But by the time I left, it was almost like a hoarder's map path in this garage because I just had walls of CRTs everywhere. And I moved a layer of just what I thought was boxes, and I found 3 2030s that I had honestly forgot I even had just sitting there. I was like, I'm so
Do they
ridiculous.
All work?
No, one of them is okay. The other 2 are parts ones, but at the same time, I was like, I thought I had a parts one somewhere, but then so that was probably like the biggest, most obnoxious thing that I had found. And other things, it's I think a lot of times like I would buy stuff thinking I would know what I want to do with it and have a plan, and then you set it down. It could just be like a little adapter or something. I finally, now that I've got the new place set up, I finally got the situation where I can use that adapter where I thought, oh, I'll buy this because one day I'll get the adapter. So there's a lot of like little things like that. I did find like some really cool stuff in the house that I moved into because this was my granddad's old house. And the house that I grew up in as a kid is this very house in this room. So it was interesting to find things that he had left behind here, like the blueprints, the original blueprints for this house from the 50s.
Jeez, that's gonna be cool.
Yeah, and so I've got those here, and just all kinds of stuff. He actually had some like a stack of comic books, and most of them were crap, but one of them was worth like $500. And so I was like, that makes it a little bit more fun because he was into such weird trinkets and things, and so much stuff just left behind here. It was kind of like a maze or a mess going through his stuff too, but that's pretty much.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever had that enjoyment cleaning out a family member's house before. It's always the opposite. It's always like, why on earth would anybody keep this? Like, on what planet does somebody go, don't throw that out? We might need that someday. So
Yeah, there was plenty of that also. Like, my granddad was the kind of guy who never threw anything away, and there was never anything that was too much junk for him. He was pretty much a junk collector, and So there was a lot of stuff. There still is a lot of stuff that's not worth anything. That's around. Most of it's gone now, but yeah.
That's funny. I mean, I guess you could say that about a lot of the stuff I have, but it's always been the same for me, right? Like in my first job I ever had when the company moved, I took every cable they had and I lugged that around from house to apartment to apartment. And one day I was like, I mean, these cables are from 1995. I don't need them. Why would I ever need these again? And less than a week goes by after I threw them out, and I needed a serial to serial cable to upgrade the firmware on a DVD-O box. And I'm like, you ass, you just lost $20 because
Yeah.
you didn't want to be a hoarder.
And then
So,
you got to go. Yeah. Then you're like, that's the worst is having to go buy it after you threw it out, and because there's no getting around it. You're
having
like,
to
I
go buy
have
it and
to.
having to wait. So your
Oh yeah.
project's on
Now it's
hold
even
for
wait
4 days
now.
when
Yeah.
you could have been done. Yeah.
Yeah.
Stuff's infuriating. So how long has your channel been around now? It's been, the past couple of years have been a blur to me. So
I know, right? It's been so I want to say that we're pushing up right about 3.5 years. I started it in about a June, end of May, June, and so that was 3 years back this last June. So 2018, I guess I started it. So yeah, 3.5 years I've been doing it now, and that's pretty much the main thing. I did the only other thing I'm active on, somewhat active on other social medias besides YouTube. Just thanks to you, the only one I really got into was Twitter. Really, about a year ago.
I'm so
and that's,
sorry.
I mean, I've had an okay time with it, but that's it. Surprisingly, and I was laughing with my wife. I think it's the fact that like my mom is not on Twitter. Like I can't step foot in Facebook anymore because mom and grandma and granddad are over there posting family photos, and that's all that turns into. So it's like now I just go there and there. But I've had the YouTube channel is now 3.5 years old. I want to say this December, and man, it's just been I've had an absolute blast doing it.
Do you have an Instagram too? I
Yeah, I do have Instagram and Facebook, but they're both on. They're just ones that I go in and check on some other people, and ones I haven't been posting on as much as probably I should be. But when it's almost like there's so many of them now that, and I feel like every day too, there's a new social media platform, and you're just like, you can't keep up with all of them. So I figure if I could do two good, then that's better than just one.
Yeah. I mean, it's impossible to keep up with all of them. That's, it's kind of useless at the same time, but
Yeah.
you just don't want to have all your eggs in one basket because I'm sick of seeing people, good channels, not drama channels, good channels wake up and have their channels deleted.
Yeah.
And it was an accident, but YouTube doesn't care.
No, YouTube doesn't care, especially like a lot of things they've been doing lately. It doesn't, things don't really make sense. So you could do that. And maybe that's why I'm sure like you, I've got too many hard drives over there with just backed up backups of videos. And it's like, I probably will never do anything with those videos unless something does happen to the channel. But at the same time, you're always thinking about that and wanting to, diversify to make sure that if something happens, you can almost reset kind of in a way where it would be devastating, but it wouldn't destroy you.
Well, there's a couple of things that you could kind of do to help that. The first, and by far the easiest, is link your YouTube account to the newer other services out there like BitChute and Odyssey. And
I've been hearing a lot about Odyssey, like for tech stuff, being even maybe a little bit good of a place right now to try to back it up.
Yeah, and I mean, I interviewed the CEO of Odyssey a long time ago, back when it was still called Library. I think it is LBRY, but I like them because they're backups and because there's no negative to doing that. Occasionally you'll have the morons be like, "Oh, well, that service has bad people on it." Well, every service that has bad people on it, I don't understand why people highlight that stuff. But yeah, I mean, I cloned up to those, and there's no negative from that. But the other thing I've done, and I could thank Risha for this because she basically bullied me into getting an unraid server where you take an old PC and all you need is a bunch of SATA ports. and it turns it into like a RAID server, but none of the drives have to match. They could all be different
Okay.
sizes. So I basically built like a $2,500 NAS for $600.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's an important one. And we're nerds. We could figure that out. So
Yeah, it's definitely important to have a backup plan. I feel like too the that's something that would always catch you kind of off guard. It's not like something that I don't think a lot of times people are really going to be unless they're provocative and that's their draw and they're already pushing the envelope of every rule and then they know they're going to get eventually booted off. Whereas us, it might just be some simple mistake of, I mean, I hate to say it, but I've self-consciously think about what I'm saying with like the parts within a CRT because
yeah,
of who knows what the trigger words are anymore when everything has become a something that could be considered something that could basically flag a YouTube video for any reason.
I don't think you actually need to do anything anymore. I think if a bunch of scumbags just all flag it at the same
Yeah,
time,
well, that's
it'd be
probably true too. That will get it reviewed and everything. So
yeah, yeah, that stinks. But yeah, I mean, I always keep good backups of everything. Years ago, I lost, a whopping 2 terabyte hard drive. That was back when they were by far the biggest you could have.
yeah,
And I started to recover it, and I could only get half the files. So I brought it to a buddy who worked at a shop, but they charged like $500, and I got everything back. And I just remember sitting there talking to my old boss about it, and he's like, "How much would another 2 terabyte drive have cost?" I'm like, probably like 350. He's like, "And how much did you spend trying to get your data back?" I'm like, "Yeah, point well made, buddy. I'm never doing that again." So I always
mm-hmm.
have everything backed up from now on.
Yeah, yeah. That's I laugh every time something goes on sale. It seems like it's always going to be memory, right? So it's like every
Yeah.
Black Friday, Cyber Monday. That's the first thing I'm like, well, I probably don't really need it, but I will eventually. So it's like, just go ahead and buy the
So
extra.
that's one thing I try to keep people in the loop of. So just like how you, for your Patreon subscribers, do the,
Yeah.
here's the cool CRTs I found. Anytime hard drives drop, I tweet about it. And yes, I
Mm-hmm.
tweet with an affiliate link because how the hell else am I going to keep the lights on? But it's not because I don't tweet because of that. I tweet because holy crap, this is cheaper. And there's always some fucking know-it-all that's like, actually, if you buy 2 smaller drives, you can combine them to make a bigger. Yeah, no shit, fuckface. But if you have an unraid server and a limited amount of bays in your computer, then you need to just take the biggest drive possible. But those 18 terabytes have plummeted and they skyrocketed and then plummeted in price. And I
Yeah.
think they're hanging out in the middle now. But I always try to tweet about those because if you're doing backups, they're slow, but who cares?
Right. If it's backup, who cares? And it's like you set that to backup overnight or something when it's not in your schedule and it's not taking up, your workflow or workspace. But yeah, that's gotten so that blows me away how much the price goes down on things like memory at such a high rate, and like at the same time, the speed just keeps going up and things and options like that. So
Yeah.
it's a good thing. At least we've got a place to put all our stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll be doing some more videos on Raid and how it relates to the gaming community and the cool things we're working on. But that's upcoming. That's
Yeah, well, that sounds cool because I'm like, yeah, I'll be definitely interested in knowing more myself on it.
there's another project going on behind the scenes that like I don't want to talk about it until it's ready because I don't want a million excited people just saying, "Is it ready yet? Is it ready yet?" Like, but when it's ready for beta, it's pretty cool. It's just some things you could do that directly relate to retro gaming.
Well, that's cool. Yeah. Well, I mean, you talk about kind of getting excited about products and things ahead of time, and I feel like sometimes a couple things this year have really like done that with, of course, our parts shortage problem the whole world's dealing with, but it's just like so much excitement around products. Like I talk to Ryan all the time from Castlemania,
Mm,
and we'll be talking about the 68X clone cards and just the unbelievable challenges he's having where he will secure all the important parts you would consider that were are going to go out, but then all of a sudden it's the final parts. Like now we're running into where B and C connections are becoming scarcer and
Yeah.
difficult to get. Not even, I mean, he's talking about, one run of boards, so he's got to get a couple thousand of them, but it's not a huge amount of them. And just the fact that he struggled just to find, I know that was the last part to find, and then getting all the parts and then getting it finally over into production. And at the same time, it's insane because I talked to Martin, developer,
Hmm.
and he's like, that FPGA now that was developed in that board, Ryan could sell that, just the FPGA, back to industry and make more money than he would, because he's not really making any money on the cards. It's like
Yeah.
he could, so it's such a strange thing because we're in this weird like cycle of where we want to get super pumped about a product. I'm sitting here wanting to test and show off like a prototype board, but I don't really want to get too much more hype out there till it's actually
Exactly.
released, especially to people that have already, paid in and are on patiently waiting, which, I mean, we all have to get in the mindset, unfortunately, of being waiting, unless we're,
Yeah.
like Mike Cheese, the only one who's done like a credible job this year of avoiding that problem.
Yeah, my patience is really wearing thin with that because for the past 6 months, I always, being like the middleman, and that's kind of how my job's always been as the middleman. Like, I understand exactly what it's like. You're the consumer, you've had a ship date promised to you, you've put your money in, and it's not there, and you don't know where it is. Did you lose your money? Is it? Like, I understand completely. And then I also understand what it's like to be in a good place in life, and then all of a sudden some terrible shit happens and you're broke, and you're like, oh, and where's that thing that I spent $300 on? I could really use that money now. I get it, and I have all the sympathy in the world, but we're months, if not a year, into a part shortage. People got to realize, like, if you're the one out, especially if you're a nerd and you're talking shit about delays, then you're kind of just an asshole. Because it's one of those, well, I don't understand. There's only 7 parts. Why can't they just get them? Like, well, that obviously you've never developed anything in your
No.
life because you can't just say, oh, well, that's a 75 ohm resistor. Yeah, just put another one on. Anybody that's ever had anything manufacturing knows exactly how this story ends. It's the wrong 75 ohm. It's too little voltage. It's too big. It's too, there's all these things that have to go in one step at a time in order to get there. So it's as general public still gets a pass, but as nerds, come on, everybody, we're nerds. We know these
We
things.
should be leading a kind of an example in this because we know where this is going and like what is happening. And I mean, I don't have any insider knowledge on any of this stuff, but I can tell from the way things are going is we've still got some months and maybe an entire, unfortunately, year of
Yeah,
bad things where it's going to be difficult before this manages to catch up and hopefully get better. I'm at the point now where I'm getting concerned that even on the jobs I work on with electrolytic capacitors, just the selection of the quality, everything has gone down to where you cannot get the same part that you might have been familiar with. And then you look at a resupply date, and it is literally, a lot of them are June 2022.
2023. I've
Oh
seen a lot of
yes,
them on. Yeah,
and I mean that. So you look at that and you're like, oh my goodness. And you look at what's available, and I start to wonder, at what point, like you say, what point are we sacrificing our product because we're taking whatever this company says is that they have left, and what they really have left is the bottom of the barrel, dried up old capacitors that were
yeah.
sitting in a bin for
Getting ready to be
5
thrown
years
out.
that were pretty much junk, but they're like, hey, we've got them, we sell them because we don't have any product after that. And this isn't small manufacturers, that are dealing. These are the big time players in parts and manufacturing.
Yeah, and on top of that too, like if you're a manufacturer and you're trying to spin things back up, you're trying to catch up, and you have a choice between making 10,000 BNC connectors that you might make 10 cents each on, or 100,000 of something else that you might make 60, 70 cents each on. Like, the stuff that used to be insignificant is now gone because, of course, they're going to make that decision, right? They would be stupid not to. So it's one of those things where we're all doomed for about another year for these new products. And there are two products that might be canceled as a result. And then there's at least three others that I'm a part of that are on hold indefinitely, where it's like, if I have time, maybe I'll rewrite this entire project for a different chip that may or may not be in stock, or maybe we'll just wait another year and see. So it sucks for everybody.
Yeah, and it's going to be a time I think where hopefully people don't get burnt out because of it, and I you know that kind of market condition definitely will, like we're talking right now, it's definitely stifling innovation and where new products are being able to be released. And then, like you say, you design a product that's for a certain chipset. Well, then the person who's put all the effort into engineering, designing, and getting everything ready for this one setup and design that's tested and ready to go out for mass testing, all of a sudden they got to go and put all this effort back into the same project around redesigning it. And that in itself, you know how that is when you're working on a project, having to get it over and get started back over. It can be a hindrance where guys who don't, you know, this is their hobby, then it obviously can put a roadblock to where it slows you down from wanting to continue down that passion. And then all of us kind of suffer from that. But I know that we've got resilient people in this business because I've seen them go through things. That's what's funny is the longer we've been doing this, the longer you see people still out and you meet them and you know years go down the road and you know they're still struggling with the same kind of things, but they're still there, so they're passionate about the business and the field that we're in.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good to see that. But just, you know, I hope everybody's careful. And I always talk about with open source projects, I've done a couple podcasts about that where it's like, I love open source and I love that people do that, but you also have to keep in mind that the world isn't always so nice. So like if you have a really cool project and you're done with it now and you want to share it with the world and you were considering making some, but you know, you're wondering if how you're going to do it. If you open source that now and it's an awesome project, a clone company is going to pick it up and they're not going to, and you know, maybe they're a company that's going to play by all of the rules and give you credit and send people to your social media, your Patreon, or maybe they're like the clone companies we're all used to, where they're just going to pass it off as if it's their design and no one knows that it's you and you get nothing for your time. So, you know, everybody's unfortunately got to pay attention and be careful.
I mean, I saw I think it was within the last day or two where that specific instance just happened with, did you see the guy who had redesigned a mini shell for the N64?
I saw that.
So this was, he said, I mean, I watched him post, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the Twitter handle, but
me neither, but it's in my queue to write up as a post. Sorry.
I'm sure it's like, oh, sorry, but he had put out this design for this really cool redesigned shell, completely printed, smaller version for
like
a
the
64.
N64 Mini or something they called it. Yeah.
And he open sourced the files, and then he said that within like 2 days of doing that, another company had come along, had production pre-orders and sold a bunch. And he's like, well, I wasn't even planning on doing this, but this is somewhere you can at least buy it from me. And, you know, so it's like, yeah, it's unfortunate because I think a lot of people, especially with the innovation and the allowance of 3D printers and circuit boards that you can easily kind of get still somewhat, there's always that, like, he did great work, designed this thing, thought he would open source it in a cool way that the community, of course, would love it and enjoy it. And then just this poacher comes along, grabs it right within a couple days, literally, and goes and starts selling it and makes, I mean, to make more money than he will make, unfortunately, off of it, I'm sure, because of just the way they're ready. But it's an ugly side of the business.
Yeah, this is a really harsh thing to say, but the unfortunate truth is if you're going to do something like that, you have to immediately come to terms with the fact that that could happen.
Right.
I just had a conversation with somebody the other day who was complaining about somebody who made a bunch of money off of their design, and I'm like, well, what license did you use for open source? They're like, I don't know. I'm like, well, did you tell people it was okay to make? And they were like, yeah, but I mean, I didn't expect this to happen. It's like, well, it's your fault then. It's not nice, it's not right, but it's 100% your fault for doing that, and you got to just suck it up and come to terms with it. And that's not a nice. No one wants to hear that. But if you're asking my opinion, you're not. You don't. Nobody calls me to have me be like, oh, you know what, you were right. Come here, let's cuddle with me. No, people call me because they're like, I fucked up. What am I gonna do? And it's
Right,
like
yeah.
sometimes the answer is you fucked up. That's it. Don't do this again if you don't want to see somebody else sell it. But
I've been around the business world long enough to see that, yeah, most of these larger corporations, especially things that are outside of the United States, they don't have any moral scruples when it comes to intellectual property.
yeah,
And honestly, some of these places are promoted to actually go out and take other people's intellectual property by their own establishments. So it's like you say, if you're not prepared for your design to be ripped off, then you either don't release it or you put in some kind of a whatever plan you want
yeah.
to try to do it. But I think you and Nick talked about it greatly in depth, that there's, from HT Retrovision on the podcast a couple weeks back, you don't have endless amounts of money to just invest in protecting your intellectual property all day. Now, of course, Nintendo and Sony, they of course do, but little guys that aren't that, I mean, those are biggest the world, so they have an interest there. They can sit there and fight that and literally just throw money at it and make no money in return, and it's not a loss for them. But us, we can't sit there and bankrupt our family and all our future over protecting one company from ripping off our design or something.
I mean, the same thing goes with any of our content, right?
Yeah.
Somebody who's like apparently a beloved member of the retro gaming community. I don't know who this person is. Somebody told that, by the way. But they stole footage of me in a video and used it in their video. So it's not even like a picture of me lag testing something. It's me, and then misrepresented what I said completely. And they said they did that because, and I don't know if this is true, this is hearsay, but I'm pretty sure they said they did that because they heard something I said about fair use and wanted to prove to me that it's not true. No, I'm still 100% right, because that didn't come from me. That came from lawyers, like with an S, multiple lawyers over the years of working on it. And I talked about this with Lon. Fair use is a defense. That's not protection. So
Yeah.
if I was a douchebag with a shitload of money, I could totally sue him. Now, I would
Yeah.
win zero money.
Yes.
And the only thing that would happen to him is he'd be forced to take the video down and, compensate me, and, which would be about 50 cents. But so that's why people don't do it. All you do,
Yeah.
you just end up looking like a giant piece of shit. You don't get any money. You
Right.
lose all your own money. But the whole fair use thing is just a defense in court. It doesn't give you the right to steal people's shit, but people do it anyway.
You're exactly right. It's just a defense in court, and it's almost so subjective too, that it has to be interpreted by whatever that single situation is, because it's not cut and dry. I think it's been proven.
Right.
And
But there's such a small difference, small difference in effort, giant difference in application. If somebody did that and stole your footage of you working on a CRT and passed it off as it was theirs somehow, or mocked you doing a good job, it's
Yeah.
a douche move. But if
yeah.
somebody screenshotted their desktop with your YouTube channel on there, so you could see your YouTube channel, talked about what you were doing, and then said, and by the way, this was Steve from RetroTech, check out his channel here. It's technically, that's still stealing, but nobody with a brain on their head would ever be mad about that, because that's free promotion, that's a compliment, that's exposure. That small difference. And especially with the retro gaming community, especially in the circle that we hang in, if somebody just messaged us like, hey, I have a bigger channel than yours and I wanted to talk about your work, is it okay? We'd shoot footage for
Oh,
him. I'd
well,
be like,
absolutely,
I would,
yeah. Like
and I
we,
have many times said, don't use the existing footage. I'll shoot brand new footage, both to make it look fresh, to improve on what I did last time, and so there's no chance of a copyright strike because YouTube's
right,
automatic.
right.
Sometimes you have no real control over that. So like I would have loved to have helped, and I'm sure you would have too. And it just so, but there's
Yeah,
nothing you could do.
you're absolutely right. I've never met anybody in our community that is like straight up no, or just like a jerk. If you're, I wouldn't. I mean, maybe that's a little bit too
Gonna
forgiving, but
say
I was gonna say.
I can open up a pad and write a list, but
I know. I
Zach's a
like.
real good friend of mine, but he's number one in the jerk
Yeah,
list.
but even with Zachary, if you have a sincere question about something, I've never seen him go off on somebody for that. Never.
Never.
Like
I've seen him bend over backwards
right.
to
I've
help
seen him
people.
like repost and say, "This is something that is like on the back of my mind, and I want to think more about how to get this out there." And like,
Yeah.
and it'll be something. And
He does love to destroy the Dunning-Kruger syndrome people, though.
yeah,
He gets pleasure in that, and I don't mind watching it. I'm not gonna lie. I'll just be honest about that.
we're all having fun here. So I mean, but again, it kind of goes back to the point where um, I don't think somebody's going to just come if again, if you came, or if somebody with a small channel came and just straight up stole your footage, which happens, and then especially misrepresenting anything, that's the worst. It's hard enough. It's hard enough for us to like try to get our point across clearly sometimes in our videos. It's like,
Yes.
it is extremely hard. It's like we're doing like technical stuff with technical reviews, and it can be very hard for us to be like, well, this was where I wanted you to like think the perspective was on this video. And there's always somebody out there with a different mindset and a different attitude that's looking for something to either nitpick and tear apart and be like this. And you're like, well, I wasn't even coming from that perspective, or that really wasn't something I was looking at. So,
And a lot of people can't wrap their head around people who do more than one thing. And I've talked about this before, but like sometimes there's like a thing in our caveman brains that are good. Like if you went to dinner one night and table magic guy comes over, like, oh, here, I want to make you look stupid in front of your table of people, and then you go the next morning for brain surgery and your neurosurgeon's table magic guy, I'm out. I understand that humans can do two different things, but I don't trust any of this. But like, why can't I do good technical videos and then also do silly stuff too? And I think that the two things that really proved that for me was, number one was the video I did with Renee where we joked around about the ROM carts, which, that was right when my channel was starting to grow, so most people got it, but then as the channel grew, they didn't know the backstory, so that was my fault. But the Retro Roundtable was a big one, and that was one that I still get messages about you to this day, and I still get so annoyed with that, because people don't seem to realize, like, the Retro Roundtable was essentially me, Voltar, Steve and Nick from HD Retrovision, and Renee from DB Electronics brutally shitting on each other for 2 hours straight.
Yeah.
With a whole bunch of like serious topics mixed in, and occasionally somebody else would come into the mix, and we would treat them like equals, like they were one of us, which means we'd shit all over them.
Right.
And I remember talking to you a few times, and then somebody was talking about
I know what you're talking
the video that you did. I didn't know that was you, by the way.
Well,
but
it doesn't even matter, because I think that literally you and I sent a message out to you within like a day of that. And because I was like, dude, I totally screwed up. I didn't see the perspective you guys were talking about.
Well, funny, because that's a big that whole thing, by the way, is a big compliment to you. Because number one, anybody that's ever made any video ever knows that your first ones are always going to suck.
Yeah.
I don't care who you are. They're all going to suck. I leave my original podcast out there.
I don't want to go look at mine, man. When one of mine pops up like in my feed,
yeah.
I'm like,
I get a little nervous when I see those too. But so there's always going to be mistakes. You got to learn from them. But I think the main thing that we shit on in that was just the whole, anybody that makes a video on CRTs has to stress that you could die doing it. It's not likely, but if you die working on a Super Nintendo, that's your fault 100%.
Yeah, and that should be like in the Guinness Book of World Records if you
Right.
figured out how to do that without throwing it in like the bathtub with yourself.
Right. But if you could die
Yeah.
working on a CRT and it's not your fault, especially if you have a heart palpitation, you don't even know you have it.
We need to give some perspective also on when this would have come out. This was like within the first 10 videos I made. I remember.
I think it was less than that.
And it was like, I mean, within the first, I hadn't made past 10 at this point. And,
I think it was more like 3 or 4, to be honest
and
with you.
it was like, I mean, this was when basically there was nothing on the internet about CRTs, like at all, really. I mean, there was a little bit.
There was a couple. RGB Rob from Australia had a couple, but it wasn't
arcade. People had a lot of videos. And then, I mean, I thought maybe like the 8-bit guy did a CRT video or something.
Oh, did he put that in the dishwasher too?
Yeah, probably. But then, but you know, the only person who really had any good content was like I think the My Life in Gaming video, and then Phone Dorks videos, which were classic and still are. And then, and Rob, and so. Then there was really nobody going into, and that was kind of like the early takeoff where my videos were kind of actually doing good. Like normally they weren't as good as the views they were getting because they were new, and it was just like, again, this was when the scene for CRTs was really growing. And I remember just being like, you know, I mean, I read through this whole manual and I had this good, nice, perfect condition, like 13-inch PVM, and it's like, there's no way I'm gonna hurt myself on it. I know what I'm doing, but at the same time, I was like, if you just clicked on that video and you saw no context, you didn't know, you just saw this guy smacking the flyback or something on the CRT, you would have thought you're okay. And like you said, then somebody would have gotten zapped because they would have been doing that on freaking, you know, no name. Emerson from 1990 that was ready to arc out and
if it was a 36-inch, then
right.
you know, then
then it's got some serious voltage running through there. So that was, look, I liked that because that was an experience for me. I'll never forget because Firebrand X was like sent me a message. Hey, dude, you made it on the Retro Roundtable.
I was just gonna say, somebody messaged me right afterwards. It must have been FBX, but somebody was like, "Hey, you know that was that guy Steve that you were talking about?" And I was like, "Oh, fuck, really?" He's like, "Yeah, he already took the video down." I'm like, "Is he pissed?" And he's like, "I don't think so. I think he's just gonna do another one." I'm like, "Oh, good."
No,
because like I could for people that don't know it, right? Like I can only imagine you're there. And this has happened before, by the way, where we were 100% right. This one is like mixed because, you know, you were starting out and we're already being assholes to each other. But like, I could imagine watching that, and now there's 5 people all harping on it. Not 1, not 2. So it's like, but you know, you could have done what a lot of these other people did. One of the main reasons I don't do the we don't do the Retro Roundtable is it got to the point where I was on an email chain where I had to listen to people's feelings afterwards because I said their product was amazing, but it might not, or might be a little too expensive for most people. And it's like, every word of that's true. I'm sorry we hurt your feelings because there was 5 of us, but you know, you didn't do any of that. You just were like, all right, I got to make sure to remember to do that in the next video. And you know, it's.
No, I remember sending you a message and I was like, I know, I was like, see, that's what I don't think a lot of people know, especially when you're getting started in YouTube or anything. There's no, your peers are like your quality control or your editors almost, you know, because like, especially if you're new, you don't have really, you're just putting it out there, and that's why you're getting the comments or the things, and that's how you learn, like, what do these people want to see? Or what do people want to see more of? What is...
and even your peers that make similar videos, like, here's tips,
here's how to help. Hey, don't, you know, I'm not trying to be a jerk, but don't, you know, try this next time.
One of the
I learned
hardest
so much from that. Like,
oh, me too. But one of the hardest things for me to this day is still trying to figure out who is a troll piece of shit and who is a good person that's just really bad at wording things.
Yes. Oh, and yes.
I've made the mistake so many times. There was one, I've told the story before, so I'll skip through it, but I was so brutal to this one person. just swearing at them. And I was like, if you could do it better, why don't you tell me how to do it? And they sat with me for 2 hours and walked me through what I did wrong.
And
I felt like such a piece
they
of
were
shit.
just trying to help.
Like, I'm so sorry.
And it's hard.
Not only are you right, but you're a way better person than I am. And I still talk to them to this day. I still like them. But like, props to them for being patient and being like, no, I'm actually trying to help you, not be. But I mean, the community in general, and you know, the bigger players too, like John Linneman, Epos Vox.
Oh,
you know,
yeah, those guys have been even. Like, I've
they
been
help
more
all of us
surprised how nice those guys have been. Both reached out to me, you know, and I just wouldn't even think about it because they're so much. I mean, they've got some huge channels and, you know, really respected. Of course, you do awesome too, you know, because. And look, I'm going to tell everybody this since we're talking all the way back about this stuff. I would have never, nobody who's gotten a CRT done from me, I would have never done any of that if it wouldn't have been for Bob and for the original, basically 2 pages that you had there on RGB monitors that I probably read through 200 times, just trying to figure out what they were originally and like going through and then totally like following your channel throughout the years. It's really you and My Life in Gaming are the 2 guys that not only like inspired me kind of to get going and doing what I'm doing, but I learned constantly from you guys still to this day watching.
Thank you very much.
So
I'm glad somebody's paying attention.
So yeah, I mean, it's been a surreal like run in all of this for me, and I've loved it. But at the same time, you bring up a great point where it's very difficult to read. Again, we're talking about context. We like that's kind of one of the reasons I started doing the new podcast with Lewis from Zez Retro. I was like, I want to have a little bit of freedom to talk about the things that are like, well, here's the video I did, and here's the things that didn't make it that got edited out, or here's maybe some context that I want to make sure is out there and known about it if you go back. And I was like, you have an opportunity kind of, I think, with the way you do your channel, and then you have, you know, obviously you've got a chance then to write about it, and then you've got a chance on the roundup. If you've made a video about it, you know, you got ways to basically like, be like, hey, you know, just so you get this clear, because I was like, I kind of need that because I feel like sometimes things that they'll get edited out of a video because they didn't look right in a shooting scene or whatever. Or it's like, I don't want you to forget this one important part that I've been asked 100 times about convergence, and it's in this one video. Please go watch it or something like that. Yeah. Because you can't. That's the funny thing about YouTube is like you're so. This is what one thing I want to bring up. We can bring it up now, I guess. But like when you're naming your videos and you're like, I have to name it like a little bit silly almost, or in like this certain. Yeah. I have to name it in a certain way for it to get like the full audience it gets. Whereas if I try to put the more technical thing that I want people to see in the video, that if I title it that, it gets half the views or something. And so you're like constantly trying to play that.
Yeah, a couple years ago, I drew my line for that. And, you know, my opinion's always changing. We're humans. The more you learn, the more, you know, you evolve. But my opinion is that my content is always going to be what I want it to be, and pretty much, you know, just an evolution of what you've seen. But the title and the thumbnail, I will do anything. A bunch of my friends make fun of the people who do like the jaw open, and to be honest,
face.
I wouldn't do that only because everybody does it now. But like, if that was a new thing that could get me views, fine. If I had to hang upside down with my man titties hitting me in the face, if that got me 1 million views, I would do it shamelessly, as long as the content stays the same. You know, I call Mason Conrad does my thumbnails because you could always tell which one Mason does and which one I do because mine are terrible. But I always tell Mason, like, a couple of them, I was like, you need to make sure that people look at this and see it in N64.
Yeah.
And put me in it because I want people to remember I did it, but like the N64 and some colorful things, and put anything else. Put a pretty big cock and balls if you think that's what's going to get people to click on it, whatever.
It's crazy how that is an entire element of the whole production. It's like you make all this countless hours of effort put into this, your baby, the video.
Yeah.
And then the last like two things you're concerned about, like the title, the description, and then the thumbnail, and it's just like insane. It's like, well, nobody. Funny thing is the years of terrestrial television, they never had to worry about anything like this. It's like,
Yeah.
if you're a fan of Pawn Stars or something, you're just watching every Pawn Stars. You're not
Well-
like, yeah, well, maybe, but
So I agree and disagree in that, like, how many people bought Ride the Lightning because they saw that badass cover and the name Metallica, like, just describes what you might want to listen to. And, like, the band could have sucked, but you still probably would have bought that, you know, at the very
that's a
least,
good
that
album cover.
album.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but
So there's, you know, there's a thing. You always.
but the album kind of matched the cover. So
Love
that
the
was
album,
like, that
too.
was where, yeah, that was where you actually got, so now you'll get the two where, but yeah, I mean, the long port, I guess, is where it's like, I can't give, like, if I'm trying to get somebody to view a big video, I can't be like naming it the most nerdy
Yeah.
convergence trick adjustment or something like that, unless it's, I need it specifically to be out there for that so that people will come just to that
Yeah.
for that. Otherwise,
I mean, you should have Mason do you up a thumbnail that
I'm
says
gonna
how not
talk
to
to
die working on
yeah,
CRT.
and see what happens.
And just walk through discharge and what it is
Yeah.
and the safety and see what happens. And, you know, maybe that'll be a kicker.
yeah, and I was, it's funny. I was talking to Ryan again from Castaway. He's like, don't you know that people just want to see you like discharge a TV like 25 times in a row so that they'll feel more comfortable doing it themselves? And I'm like, yeah, I do some so many times, take it for granted, know how to do it.
That's something that you're good at visually, and you got to keep doing it, because we're both very, very lucky that a large part of our watchers, listeners, whatever you want to say, English is not their first language.
Yeah, that's true.
And they still take the time to try and listen to what we do. So get your visual cues in there. That's why for the fancy videos I do, I just spend an ungodly amount of time making it. Because remember, I'm no My Life in Gaming, I'm no John Linneman. It's a lot of work for me to make it look that fake ass wannabe My Life in Gaming video.
It's like, I was gonna say, you're like you do great stuff, because like, we were talking before this, being somebody who doesn't have any kind of like a film background. It's you know, you're running against something you don't really know what you're running against. Like am I doing good? Am I doing good?
I
And
just
unless
learned
somebody
as I
really
went the whole
tells
way
you,
up.
you're just, and I think that, I mean, I love a lot of the, you've been doing great stuff that for like years, I've been trying to emulate for, which I'm glad you actually brought over some things with you that, like the spinneroony, the spinner
like
for
that.
the CRTs. I was like, man, that would look so cool if I could just like kick it and let it spin for a minute. So
little tricks like that, learn from each other, but keep your visual cues up there, because if people see, or even people that might not necessarily, you know, speak another language first, even people that are just half paying attention, because that's what a generation of people do now. Like, if they see you, you know, with your hand on the chassis and like you know, put a glove on. You don't need a glove, but put a fucking glove on or something, and just so people see, like, this is the danger part. Like, just do that every time. Throw it every chance you can. You know, it's an extra minute or two in your video. It's like a cool thing. And
yeah, I need to get some cool graphics, just like warning, you know, like
get
the
a second
giant
camera focused just on the anode cap, so you see the spark.
wish
so you can do the 2-camera view.
I think I've gotten a sparks on them only on obviously consumer televisions mostly, because the pro ones have I can remember like going through and discharging almost 100 PVMs, and then I was laughing because I was like about to grab this PVM, and I was like, this never zaps. What am I worried about? And that was the one time I turned it over and did it, and it did the spark. And so, like you say, you never can. It's just like anything. Anytime you take something for granted, that's when it's going to bust you in the ass. That's always the way it's been.
I just replaced all of the outlets in my house, like 90% of them. And I was so cautious because, you know, I hadn't done that in a while. So I was like, okay. And there was a couple things in my house that were wired wrong. And I'm like, that doesn't look right. And the electrician showed up like, that's not right. I'm like, all right, cool. The very last toggle switch I did, the very, very last one out of, probably 50 at this point, toggle switches, plugs, everything around your, think of how many plugs you have in your whole house, right? It was a little off-centered, so I just grabbed it and twisted it to try to center it, and I grabbed right onto the screw, and I was like, whoop, okay. Like, it's barely a shock, but that's what happens when you get cocky.
Yeah. Well, there were a couple of the worst, the most difficult one to like get in and kind of mess around with that I've zapped myself the most with has been trying to adjust the Sony PVM 2030 we talked about. So that's the black cube 20-inch PVM from like the late 80s, early 90s. And when you get inside of it, it tells you all these fancy things you can do, of course, to adjust like your dynamic convergence. You got your little potentiometer on your neck board. The problem is you can't reach it. Like you can't get in there and reach it.
Yeah.
And if you do, what happens is this board's hot and this board's hot, and all it takes is for you to do like that against the two or a piece of metal, and boom, it'll zap you. And like you pull your hand back just as a natural reaction, and I've scraped my hand from doing that. So it's not like even a bad zap. I did have the power go out too, because those ones are actually kind of dangerous. They've got an outlet in the input board, like an additional hot outlet that just goes straight off the power supply. And so you can get another put anything in to power it. And I had one of those where that outlet came loose from the shell, and I plugged the monitor, turned it on, and that thing grounded out the hot against the metal frame and popped my house power, where it just, like, I had to go back to the breaker box and flip switches. And that was the scariest, because it made a big vzz and like cut the power out. And that was something that was not an anode cap. So you have, anytime you have something plugged in, you can't take it for granted. If it's plugged in, now, even if, I've talked to Save on Pat about this, because he has seen people, zap themselves a lot by trying to discharge it. Because if you look at the way Sony made you discharge, do you realize what they made you do? They didn't let you use a discharge tool.
Right.
Like you'd have probably gotten fired or written up if you tried to use a discharge tool to get the anode cap off.
Right.
And so, like, you had to actually get on there and pull it off, and then you could use the discharge tool after to discharge.
Yeah, Pat and I, when I was over at his house, I was talking to him about the specific BVM we were looking at, and he was like, off mic, he was like, actually, this is about one of the safest, BVMs you could ever work on. And I just said, Pat, will you please do me a favor? Don't ever fucking tell anybody that. Don't, because they're gonna see you do it to this, and they're going to go grab, something else. And he's like, it's a good point. I was just thinking, though, when we were having this conversation, I just had a flashback to kindergarten, first grade, something like that. I got a crazy good memory. So, but somebody came in from the power company who worked on the lines. Thank you very much. And he was showing the equipment that he uses when he's up on the ladder or up in the bucket. And it's basically like a small glove, and then a giant, like the ultra dishwasher gloves, but like industrial. And then there's another glove over that. And he said every day when he goes in, he blows up the little one like a balloon, blows up the other one like a balloon, and if it doesn't hold air, they cut the fingers off all of them just to make sure, because even the slightest pinhole the electricity could go through. But with those triple gloves set up, he's like, you could grab a line
and
on
never.
the pole. So are those things available today? So somebody who wants to work on a CRT could put those on and just grab the anode cup, pull it off, and hit it with a screwdriver?
Well,
because if you could grab a power line from the street, you could grab an anode cup.
Well, you can definitely do that, and I've done that in some of the earlier safety videos where you take and you get the like the electrical rubber gloves that come down to like here. I've got a set
almost
here,
all the way to your elbow.
And then you see, like, you could do a poor man's version, and you just get like leather gloves that you put over top of those.
Yeah.
Now, I'm just saying that's like one thing, but that's kind of like a step towards that. But you definitely can go to a place, because I got my safety glove, my other safety gloves from Granger. Have you heard of Granger?
Yeah, of course.
So Granger has all that stuff for still linemen and stuff. So you can go buy any, like they'll have a
Do you know how
rating.
much they cost?
They're generally about $100, I want to say, like
Kinda what I
80,
figured.
60 to $100, depending on the quality of it. And then that's per set. So if you went like 3 sets, you might pay a little bit, like 3 times that. Of course, you would never have
One set would be fine, right?
Yeah, but yeah, you would never have the real the worst. The problem is I think with a CRT is when you have to get in there and work on something, while it's turned on. Like
Yeah.
that's the scariest part. It is still even gives me goosebumps, but just know that when it's like got power into it and you have to do those certain adjustments, you don't have a choice. And
Right.
it's like you have to get near the yoke. So if you have to add a convergence strip, or if you have to adjust like on an older PVM and you have to adjust the yoke to tilt, or if it's leaning one way and it's wonky, either situation, a lot of times you got to turn the screen on and then you're putting your arm near not only you've got your arm up there next to the anode cap kind of already.
Yeah.
And that you should never really even though feel comfortable doing that, I don't think, because
Right, yeah.
that is, again, it's like you're talking about your in a kindergarten class talking to the high power lineman. There wasn't a time where he was putting those gloves on where he was ever like probably comfortable. And I would have been like, I remember, in my prior life before I got into all this, the most experience, I had a job where I did some electrical work, and it was with BASF Chemicals, which is like the biggest chemical company in the world. And my specific outfit would go and put chemicals into concrete and make them do different things that they weren't supposed to normally do, either really strong or really flow fast and be set. And then the final thing was to put colors into them. So if you go into a Walmart and you notice the color of the concrete on the floor, that's not just painted, it's got a pigment dye mixed into it. So the chemical company had us put these machines in that were in C containers. They just show up to the site, but they had to be wired in at like the 240 volts. Mm-hmm. So that was like the scariest thing ever to me. They were always like, you could come in here and rewire this and die. And they would just constantly be saying that. They're like, you could touch this junction box and die. And I was just terrified of ever going near those color machines. But that's really the way, if you're not like, and that's a good way to describe it, because I feel like if you're not willing to take the time to really invest the time to research like the safety involved, because it doesn't take a lot to go and read a service manual for a CRT that you own.
But practice safety and stay terrified. I've never once gotten zapped from a CRT because every time my hand goes near it, I am consciously thinking, this could be very bad. I could die. It's the same reason I never crashed my motorcycle. I was a little unhinged in my youth, and I just, because every time I got on that sucker, 15 miles an hour putting by the ocean, or 170 around a corner wearing shorts, t-shirt, and sunglasses, I knew any second I could die, and I never had a problem. I shouldn't say that. Every time you get on a motorcycle, you have a problem, but I never died because I was always terrified of it. And there were so many occasions where if I was blasé about the whole thing, I'd have been street pizza. So it's
yeah, I think that's definitely something when it comes to a CRT, and I think that's kind of why the importance of what I'm trying to do with my channel is I don't want it to really be all about like this is the all end be all like guide to doing something. A lot of times what I'm trying to do is just give the viewers a glimpse into doing it, so that this is part of that research, right, that they should do. I tell anybody, I'm like, if you're going to work the first thing people always ask me, and I tell them the same thing every time: if you're going to work on any CRT, pick the CRT and then try to find the manual. And then make yourself know everything in that manual. Is 200 pages on a CRT. It's boring as all get out.
Yes.
But sit there and learn as much as you can about that machine from the actual manufacturer.
Or at the very least, learn as much as you can about what it is that you need to do. So it's like, okay, well, part of my screen is a little askew, so how do I do that? And then, watch a couple of your videos, jump into the manual, and just immerse yourself in that and kind of go from there.
I think it's like, you take it and you see a problem on your screen, and then like you say, you can go then and reference the manual. It'll tell you how to do something. Then you go watch some videos of watching CRTs get restored. And like I said, then you find one with a problem, and then you see me do it. So that, because I don't think you should just, like I said, we were talking about a dangerous machine. You should not really just go watch my video and then just go jump into it without learning a little bit more. Because, you got to... but this is again like this is more on the side of the dangerous stuff that you're doing, because there's still some things you can do what's not really dangerous with these machines.
You had a couple of videos that I loved where you were basically like, here's a few things you could do that's like zero safety, like here's how to mess with your front settings, here's different things, like those are cool. And also, once you have it discharged, it is pretty damn safe to work on. As long as you discharge it twice. Jose taught me that. The 32-inch JVC, I hit it, with the screwdriver, and I was like, all right, cool. And I went to grab it, and he's like, hit it again. That's a big tube. And sure enough, there was an equally as loud pop, or almost equally as loud. But, once that's discharged like that, like then you could really get in there and you don't have to worry, as long as you don't do something really stupid like plug it back in. But once again, that's on you at that point. So
so like you're saying, if you have it, the only thing I'm talking about with this stuff is like these difficult, has to be running higher these are like master level CRT adjustments with this, having it running. Whereas you say, if you're just getting in, wanting to recap it, and it works before that, and you're like, I want to recap it. I've recapped consoles. I'm ready to recap a CRT or something. Then, like you say, you get in and you discharge it, and definitely always double discharge the tube, because I've heard the same thing where a guy had his wedding ring and got a bad zap from an arcade monitor. He did the same thing, discharged it. Discharged it once, and then while he was working on the chassis, just put his arm up at the top of the tube, not thinking about it, and hit that ring, and it about made him shit his pants. But it's not.
I don't wear any jewelry, so at least
that's what I was like. I was laughing. I was like, I haven't worn mine into the wild just because I don't want anything like that. But it's definitely something that once you get it discharged, you're not, unless like you don't plug it in. If it's fully discharged, if the tube's fully discharged, there's really no harm. You could even go through, I know people have always said, like, be careful of capacitors. And there might be, like, I've seen a couple, I've got a video coming really soon about a Panasonic that has filter caps in the power supply that are literally this big around. That might be something.
One thing that I've always done, and I was a little kid, we had a Toshiba CRT that kept dying, so we brought it to a repair shop at least twice, and he mentioned to me, like, because I was always a little shit that thought I could open up anything and try to fix it, and he was like, don't ever do this, these are dangerous to work on, and make sure to discharge the plug too, even if you're just moving it. So ever since I was 11 years old or something, when I unplug a CRT, if I'm going to be working on it, I take just the AC cord and I just jump it together with a screwdriver. And then if I know I'm going to be working on it, like, I'll hold the AC line jumped and I'll hit the power button. Once again, not plugged into the wall. Like, AC cord in the air, holding up. And I've never once seen a spark. Ever.
Wow.
But I have on other stuff, on other electronics equipment, especially like computer power supplies, things that take a charge. So I feel like, and I've asked people about this over the years, and a lot of people are like, I do that too, and an equal amount of people are like, that sounds dumb, but it's not going to hurt anything, so keep doing it, whatever. But that's kind of, I always try to do that too, just because it's like, even if even if it's not a safety issue, even if there's zero chance of me dying, for such an easy thing, like how dumb would we all feel if I like dropped an AC cord on the table, it hits my, $600 Zoom F6 recorder and shorts it out because it hit the wrong time. So it's just,
It's good to get in, and it's good to get in the practice of just this isn't a new concept. When you go into work for big companies, man, you got to go through safety checklists for this reason. And if anybody was like, if this was 20 years ago and we were going into like a major CRT repair shop, I guarantee you they'd have all kinds of these safety checklists, because again, somebody came in there not thinking they were hot stuff and zapped their cells. And
every time I've gotten cocky, it's bit me. Sometimes literally with the zapping. But we had one, I used to work for a company that made all-in-one computers, and one of our customers wanted the power supply on the inside. We tried explaining to him, like, look, like medical grade stuff has to go through a completely different set of certification. You need a medically certified power supply. It's got to be on the outside. We could put it in the ceiling, long DC wire, whatever. And they're like, well, can you make us a prototype? We're like, fine, but you're paying for it, and it's almost no chance of passing. They're like, all right, well, let's just do it. Let's see what happens. So myself and the engineer are looking at this. We're putting it together, and then I must have been half asleep or something, because I came up with a brilliant idea of, well, there's this giant heatsink on there. Why don't we bolt it directly to the metal chassis so it dissipates the heat? And he's like, that's a great idea. We're both thinking like it's a DC power supply, right?
Yeah.
As if we're putting ground to metal. So we have this whole thing up, and because it was sitting parts facing up, so we flipped it upside down. The temperature ratings all drop. We're all so excited, like, good idea, Bob. Good thinking, Bob. And all of a sudden, the computer just goes off. And we went, what happened? And then we realized that the AC power was going through that metal heatsink, and we were basically putting AC to ground, and we blew the whole thing out. And if any one of us happened to be like grabbing the metal arm at the same time,
then you would have been grounding yourself through that.
All of the metal chassis had like a coating on them to prevent them from oxidizing. Yeah. So as soon as that power supply kept rubbing through it, once it got through the anti-oxidization thing, that's when it zapped. And I was just like, I think that was the last time I was ever cocky about that. Although there were many times, like I had to have a rule, like nobody was able to work on open frame power supplies before 10 a.m. because of all the times I'd come out, like my flight from Asia would land, I'd get home at 2 a.m., I'd be in the office at 8 o'clock, and I'd be like, all right guys, what are we doing? Damn it! And then it smells like burnt flesh for the next 2 hours. Just
you get some two spots on you. You're like, that's a reminder.
Yeah, I'm quick on my feet for a fat guy, but like when you're stuck to open AC power, like it takes a good solid second before you could
that's actually interesting. You bring that up, the medical grade stuff, because I working on PVMs, and half of them are medical grade, and you get to see actually a difference inside between just something as simple as like a medical grade PVM, then there's the non-medical version of it, and it will have a completely different it's mostly power stuff, and it's all this different things for power treatment and like interference and like low levels of, I don't know, grounding or any kind of, and I'm not sure what it is, but they have got some different, definitely engineering in them.
Yeah, 100%.
Compared to
it's electromagnetic interference, but it's also temperature tolerance.
Okay.
Tolerance of DC voltage. A lot of medical grade could go from 8 to 24 volts. So like a Sega Genesis could go from like 7.5 to like 10 volts or something like that. 8 to 24 volts DC.
That's a big range.
There's a whole bunch of stuff. There was somebody recently selling those internal PSU replacement kits for consoles. Mm-hmm. So now you take, you put the little one on the inside, you put the external brick on the outside, and they had shipped a medical grade external brick with it. And I was just like, I don't know who you are, kid, but you just got my respect big time. Like, there is no way that, like, and even if the internal PSU is like not as good as it could be, like putting the good stuff on the outside, the AC to DC translation, Like that's a big part of keeping clean power.
Yeah. I don't know.
And you don't need to do that, by the way.
Yeah.
Don't all go run out and get medical grade PSUs for your
Yeah, you
consoles. Just saying.
don't. Yeah, that you don't need to spend the money there,
The
but
triads
because
are more than enough.
they're. Well, I kind of I can't remember who I was talking to. I was trying to get like what was the practical reasoning for that, and I think that I was told, and I don't know if this is you could. I was told that there is like since oxygen equipment, you can't have anything that could possibly cause a spark
Yeah.
in anything, basically.
Yeah, or it has to be sealed in a thing
Yeah.
or something like that.
Well, and then there was one of the things that really made me notice it was we talked, and it's kind of like the evolution of the CRT. It always goes back to kind of that 80s, 90 era where the 2030 again is that big cube monitor, and it was used both in Hollywood and in or production, video production, but also in medical arenas for like surgical theaters and things like that. And the reason I found out that is because I bought a bunch from a medical university, and they had these external additional power supplies built onto them, and they were so old and like had all these weird coils and things in them, and the only way I could ever get it to work was by taking that out and just removing it completely and going back to the old standard power supply that they had in the monitor to begin with.
Yeah, that's probably the best bet in that situation.
I'm gonna have to do it.
Ooh, we got a friend back.
Brutus is back.
So you mentioned before you're doing a podcast with my buddy Lewis, good dude. When I first heard that, when he first mentioned he was going to do something with you, I was so happy because he's a huge nerd, so he's into this stuff, but he's really good on mic. I thought you two would bounce off each other really well. And in fact, he was the person I called when I had the Rona, where I was like, dude, I got to get back on the horse and start riding again. So will you carry the podcast? And he's like, yeah, I got you. Whatever you need. So, where it was like, that was like the worst podcast I ever did, but Lewis was awesome. So like it was actually a perfectly listenable podcast because of him.
Yeah.
So I was really glad to hear that you guys were doing that together. And the first interview you guys did, that was pretty epic. The stories that you were telling, like I don't want you to repeat yourself because I want people to go subscribe to that and listen to it. But that was pretty freaking epic. It brought me back to some of my crazy days where I'm just like, all I could think about is I wondered what parts of those stories you weren't telling, because I just thought of all those times that I was in those situations where I'm like, I mean, it's past the statute of limitations.
Oh, I know, right? Is there ever a statute of limitations? First off, yes, I love working with Lewis, and it's so funny because I saw your podcast with him, and I was like, wait, I know Lewis, and it's like he's like that guy, and she's just like, I know him, and then he, to me, I was like. He said, I'm doing a show, and then he asked me to be on there. And I had just a great time and talking about what you were talking about, doing the stories. I knew I would have a good time with him because I could just tell he's just got, he's a really great guy to talk to. But we did that first thing together. And the whole time I was like, man, it's like I want to ask him to do more because I was like, I don't know. I could just tell because he, like you said, he is so good. And this goes back to his training and his job in Estonia as a MC and like working with comedians and hosting events. I could just tell he's so good at podcasts and, going back and forth. He is very like a professional at it. And he's so into cathode or CRTs. I was like, please, and he was like, yes, let's do it. So we've been having just an awesome time talking about that stuff. And there's always more stories though. But
yeah,
you're right, man. Sometimes you're just like, could somebody in this town get mad and finally say, I wonder what happened all those years ago? And
yeah, I definitely have a bunch of those.
Yeah.
But Lewis is another one where his other comedy guy, Lewis Ezran Comedy Guy, that podcast is centered around his friends and the Estonian comedy scene. but he's got a couple that are total anybody could listen to. And while they talk about that a little bit, it doesn't matter. It doesn't take away from the conversation. And I wish there was an easier way. Just same thing with like me and my weeklies, right? The weekly videos, the people that are into retro gaming, I'm sure, aren't bored of, but it's not for the general people who are just casually into it. And it's the same with him. There's a couple of Pincho, his friend Pincho, I think I'm saying his name right. I'm sorry if I'm not, but he went off on a rant about parking lot attendants where like I was heaving laughing. I was just crying. And it just sent me right back to my early 20s. It was so spot on correct. Like I'm not going to steal his bit and ruin it because I would kill it.
Oh my goodness!
I was dying, and then the whole rest of the podcast was great too. It was talking about like moving from a different country, which both of them did, and so yeah, like I'm glad to see him get to do other stuff because he's somebody that I hope more people get to know.
Yeah, me too. I really do, and that's. That's since it was a new thing, and that's kind of the reason I was like, let's put it, on Zez Retro, and let's grow from this. Let's learn about it, because my whole thing was, again, having another opportunity to talk not only more in depth about things, but just to have a place to go to kind of go. I knew that. See, I felt like the more that I got comfortable with Lewis, the more weird things conversations would just end up happening that wouldn't be so much. There will be some great ones that are retro focused and nerdy focused, but then some great ones that aren't. I don't know how that exactly will work towards the audience and stuff like that eventually, but I've had a great time with him, and it's funny because we'll have like a ready thing to talk about for an hour, and then we'll spend like 30 minutes before that talking about just random stuff, and then 30 minutes after talking. And we're laughing, and we're like, should we just be recording this stuff? Because it's way more, we're just like, again, like talking about things, back and forth of our lives. And that's one of the other reasons I really wanted to work with Lewis is he's Australian and in Estonia.
Yeah, it's a
and then
funny
I was
story.
like, that's so cool that like it's somebody else who's got the European.
All of that recording though.
Yeah.
Kevtris is the fucking worst at that. I like him. I haven't talked to him that often, but I still consider him a friend. But Kev is the dude where you show up, and this is how I did it. Let me talk to you about it. All right, thanks, Kev. Great. Okay. And the moment you hit off, he's just
like off the
fun
charts.
and personable, and it's stuff where like. I would never do this, but if I had just been like, okay, we're off, but kept recording, if I had sent it back to him, he'd have totally been like, yeah, you could do that. But like, it's just one of these things where it's like, yeah, you gotta record absolutely all of it.
And I've been having, and I'm having so much fun because again, I'm learning things through the lens of Lewis. I'm learning things and like his experiences. I'm learning things about Eastern Europe and Australia at the same time and then we're that's like a big part of the show is trying to represent each culture, but also talk about cultural differences, even in just like retro gaming and like what people are doing, because getting like CRTs in Europe is a different game than really the United States, because in Europe they already had SCART and RGB. And so there's not like this crazy, now there's a crazy eBay market all the time in the United States, but over there's not really a big eBay market for it. So he's always concentrating on like, how are people getting these? What are they doing? How are they getting, again, the monitors and things, and what are they looking for in them? Because it's not the same. And then I have people that I've met that are like, there's like deserts where you're either in a desert where you can't find a CRT, or you're in a desert where you can't find anybody else that wants the CRTs.
Right, yeah.
And I have another guy who's in like Kuwait, and he's like, I've got 50 BVMs, but I don't know.
Contra.
Yeah, I don't know what to do with them. And it's like I don't know. It was like before the world became a shipping nightmare, I was like, you could possibly get a shipping container of all these things. He's like, I have all these candy cabs too. And I'm like,
you've seen his pictures.
Yeah,
of them, right?
I'm like, we can make, I was like, you can send them to me and we can sell them. But then now it's like, how do you even get a shipping container? It's not going to get back here for a while. So it's kind of, it stinks. But that's the funny thing is you get you're either always looking for a CRT or you're finding them and you got nowhere to put them.
Yeah. You mentioned like hearing the cultural differences. I always love to hear the cultural differences and stuff, but the things that make me the most happy are the stories that are exactly the same. Because like Ronnie, good friend of mine, contributor to the website, awesome dude, and he was telling stories. I can't remember if it was when we did the live stream together or it was one of the writers' podcasts, but he told a story about like how he ended up with the Genesis, and it was like one of those things that's so, it's very unique. It's very like something that you might only run into if you grew up where he grew up in Lebanon.
Yeah.
But then like he told another story that's like we could have lived on the same street together. It's just like the same type of thing. It's funny, our taste in music's the same way. Like we grew up two completely different worlds, but like he is a badass metal bassist.
Yeah,
we like a lot of the same
he's
music.
a really cool guy. He's been a long time like supporter of my channel and follower of that, and I've talked to him a lot because I was talking to him. I don't know, there was like a conflict going on there. I don't know what it was, like 2 years ago maybe or something, like in the area where he was living.
Oh yeah,
you remember?
Yeah.
And this was a while back because he was.
Then the fertilizer plant exploded.
Yes.
Or at the port, the fertilizer exploded.
And it was like, because he had a 20L2 and we were talking about it, and I would just be like, man, I would just always try to be like, because he wouldn't bring it up. I was like, are you hanging in there? Are you doing all right? Because I'm like, I care. That's the thing is like, once you start, it's really, I find it really interesting because you become, friends with people in a different area that you've never physically in person met, but you've done so much with and talked so much with, and you feel real close to them. But then when they're like not around you and something happens to them or something goes on around them, it's like really, it's almost like so worrisome because again, that's when the reality sets in that they are completely in a different spot and like, going through craziness that's out of everybody's hands. And it's always something like that, man.
But I mean, it's one of these things. Like, I mean, you saw it at the meetup, right? Most of those people, in fact, had never met in person. But like,
no,
I think I had met Super G once. But like, it's funny to see like a lot of us just in the same room. Like, we have been friends for a long time, and even though it was the first time a lot of us had met, didn't feel that way at all because we'd all corresponded and stuff like that. And
yes,
it just goes to show, right? Like, I don't want to get all philosophical, but like, everybody is unique. We all have our own culture, our own background, but we're all the fucking same. All of us. We all eat shit and die. We all, we all do our thing, and it's like, it just stuff that reminds you of that. It always makes me happy, or sometimes sad. Like the stuff that happened to Ron last year, Handlebar. Like, man, that really fucked me up.
Man,
I wasn't even that close with him.
I didn't either. Like I had just followed him on Twitter, probably a month before you interviewed him, and the real, I was. There's he's had so much crap go on, and so many people that it's frustrating because the internet, what we're talking about right now is like the best of it, like where you can go and make real connections with a real friend, and then have somebody there like it's you can rely on. But at the same time, there's so much the opposite of that going on too. Him and just I saw where he lost his dog recently. Both of them.
Both dogs. Yeah, it's just
so that's
a year.
And I know that I think it's Carl, right? He's not
his husband. Yeah.
He's not been doing good. I mean, from what I'd seen on the posts, so it's I don't care like what the situation is. If it's like, do you have a heart on things? It's like, are you gonna, do you feel compassionate for people? And that's, people that going through, you never can. That's why I always try. And we were talking about people not having good filters online and, leaving comments. And I know that this is a little bit different. I've always been kind of like give the benefit of the doubt, and I really just don't like if somebody leaves a dumbass comment. A lot of times I just ignore it, but because again, I don't know. They could have had the shittiest day of their life, I guess, and just gone and decided to take it out on my video. And if that was got them through that day, then, and all I did was take them talking shit to me, then that's okay. And I don't care about it. But
I think there's different things that are good procedure for each platform. So on Twitter, never, ever, ever block, because then they use that as their badge of honor. Now, I've been saying that for a long time, and I forgot that I still had a bunch of people blocked, and one of my crazy stalkers did exactly that. Well, Bob just blocked me because of, and then he made up some batshit crazy. But this one in particular is really really articulate.
Yeah.
So it's always the same cycle where he'll convince a bunch of people I did something, and they'll all believe him, and then a couple of weeks go by, and they're like, I think that guy's fucking crazy. And then they'll all be like, all right, and then he'll move on to another group of people. But so never, ever, ever block on Twitter. Just mute. YouTube, I think it probably affects your algorithm, but anybody that's disrespectful to anybody else in the chat automatically block.
Yeah,
deleted.
I think that's a good thing, especially if you're disrespectful to somebody else who's just leaving a comment or is just whatever.
Yeah, and for me personally, like, if you're obviously a troll, you're gone. And I know you're not supposed to. People have created 6 or 7 different accounts to tell me that I shouldn't be blocking them. And it's like,
hey, you blocked my other 3 accounts, but
yeah, it just no. The answer is no. And sometimes I get it wrong, and the times that I feel the worst, I've got so much better at this. By the way, for anybody listening, I promise I've gotten better. But somebody will say something. I'll be like, yeah, I think you're a fuckface. You got all that wrong. You know, why would you say that? It's like, I'm really sorry. English is actually my 3rd language. What I meant to say was, and I'm like, oh my God, I am the worst human ever. I am so sorry. Please forgive me. Please read the other comments in this video so you know why I thought you were saying that. And every single time, they're always like, it's okay. I understand. I'm trying my best. You're trying your best. But like,
you've got to, you're right.
I feel like that dried out turd on the inside of the toilet that you can't even really scrape off. Like, that's what I feel like when I do those things.
From your perspective, it's probably coming right after you know, a couple of the
6 or 7 real pieces of
idiots
shit. And you click on their profile. When was it created? Yesterday? Yeah, I know why you're here. Yeah. I'm not even going to give you the time of day.
Well, I think we jumped off a little bit, but I remember, you know, we would mention Ron, and he had, I don't know if this is what you were going at, but he, I thought that one thing that's cool that you guys conversed about in his interview was he liked to tell stories about like growing up, what's a memorable, and he was talking about how him and his grandmother.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, see, you said like things that you like connect with somebody on, you hear about them, and that's the same thing with me. Like one of my earliest memories, some of my earliest memories were like 5 feet from us here in this room.
That's pretty funny.
And yeah, like the whole Ninja Turtles NES game, the impossible jump, was conquered in this room by me. That's like the only thing. And then like the only thing bigger than that was going past the seaweed or whatever, the swimming level. But
that fucking game.
Oh, that game, yeah. I remember thinking, I was like, yeah, this was the house that I come over and play that game because I didn't have it at home. But then he's brought up his grandmother, and I remembered my grandmother was in Florida, and our families were always like Nintendo families. It was like always having the Nintendos, and then I eventually bought the Sega Genesis and stuff, but like my grandmother had a Nintendo, and we went down to Florida, and she got the new Mario 3. And so she's like, oh, I got new Mario 3, come check it out. But her idea of checking it out was us, me and my kid sister, to go watch her play it for 3 hours till she got tired of playing it. And then she's like, here, it's your turn.
That's amazing.
So
that is amazing.
That's my first Super Mario 3 video memory. Was she literally sat there for 2.5, 3 hours playing while we watched. And we're like, can we play Grandma? Not yet. And of course, she spent hours at like slot machines, so it makes sense.
Yeah, my grandma did too, but never, not video games. She just liked the slot machines. That's what
But
she.
yeah, that was kind of a funny reminisce. It was, for some reason, it just ended there. I remember my grandmother. She had her and my granddad had the big, like, worst projection TVs you imagine. Like the first ones from the,
The CRT projection ones,
yes,
right?
that were terrible.
Yeah.
Like, that would have
I've
a
never seen
big,
one that was good.
oh no, and it would have like a big, like, weird plastic plexiglass screen thing that
Yeah.
you could sit there and watch it, and you would literally just see everything in almost red, green, and blue. Everything's in primary colors because
Yeah.
it was just terrible. And I remember like trying to go over there and beg them to let me hook up the Nintendo to that. Never wanted that. Oh no, you can't do that to the nice TV. But
So I remember being a kid and two or three people I knew had one, and you weren't allowed to hook up the video games to it because they said you're not supposed to. And I'm just like, I don't know.
maybe you weren't supposed to. It probably looked terrible when you did.
I don't know. Maybe they were worried about burn-in or something.
Yeah.
But it was never good. And remember those Mitsubishi DLP projection TVs?
Oh yeah, yeah, from the late or the early 2000s and stuff. Yeah, those
Yeah.
were.
I remember my aunt got one, and all I could think about is, man, I really wish you called me first. Because I'm sure it's past the return period, and this thing is a
Those
fuzzy
things.
turd.
Oh man, I actually did. So when I was in college, my my house that I went to college, and my house, it was literally the weekend before Christmas exam week. I'll never forget it. And I was a sophomore, and I just moved. I lived in this house with all these party drunk idiots that I grew up with, and every single one of them, besides me, had failed out of school, right? So no one could live in the house anymore. So I'd got everything moved out of the house except for like a console tube television that was left there, and like a futon. And I was the only one left in the house at this point, and I remember watching Charlie Brown Christmas over the air. And then I went to school the next day, and I got these calls like, "Oh, your house back home, it caught fire and burnt to the ground." And I was like, "What?" And so like thankfully everybody was okay. Nobody got hurt, but it was literally like a couple days after I had moved all my things back home that they burnt.
So you basically just delivered your
Yes,
stuff to a bonfire.
Yes. So like
Oh, that's
anything
fucking
I had like
horrifying.
from a kid growing up got burnt up in that fire. But so that was a pretty a crazy experience. But yeah, it was. I'd moved from that house and moved everything into that back to the old house, and then it just went up. And I remember having the finals, and I went and I was like, before the finals tests, I'd go tell my teacher, "Hey, my house just burnt down." "Oh, don't worry, you can just keep the grades you got." And I was like, "Really?" So I was like, this is kind of pre-internet, but I was like, man, that's actually a pretty good scam if you run around and tell people your
Pretty
finals week, because they didn't make me take a single final, and they just let me keep my grade, which were good, but I don't even remember where we got going on that. But
You know what's funny is if I feel like I'm wronged, I could call somebody the most horrific name on the planet and go to bed feeling good about myself. But like I don't think I have it in me to be like, my house burned down. I can't, I can't give my homework in or something like that. I don't think I could ever do that.
yeah, you mean like, oh yeah, like if it was
Like, just
something
lied
it's like
about it.
lied about,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, that's what I was kind of thinking, because nobody. That's exactly what the teachers are thinking. Nobody in their right mind would claim that their house burnt down, and
Right. Yeah.
but I mean, it really did happen. But I was like, that's actually interesting. I didn't have to take.
There's a lot of people that would, though. All the people that buy like
sure.
the
Nowadays, yeah.
buy a new product and then
turn it
swap
up.
it out for like a
Have you-
something garbage and return it. Yeah.
This is completely off topic, but have you ever heard of the store Home Goods?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. I read this whole intricate article about the scam for Home Goods. So the biggest problem Home Goods have is that people will go to Home Goods and buy an item, and then they'll take their receipt and they'll take the price tag off the item, and they'll go stick the price tag on some other shitty household item they have that's different, because all their items are like custom one-piece things, and they said they have people just returning their old items back, and they can't argue it.
I knew a guy who was
It's like, I never even thought of that.
This is really horrible. Somebody's going to try to cancel me for this. But, like, we had a couple people growing up that, like, were giant pieces of shit. And one of them passed away young. And all, like, the newspaper article was like, yeah, he has whole life ahead of him. And I'm like, pity. And then there was one or two that almost died in the hospital and survived. And I'm just like, man, I hope they turn their life around. I hope they realize. But they're not going to, and they didn't. And they were the piece of shit that should have been the kid that died. Everybody was like, oh, they could have been anything, even though they knew they didn't. And one of this guy's big scams for years before he got caught was going to all of the big stores. And I'm pretty sure there's so much, like, I don't think I'm giving anything away. I don't think you could do this now, but he would go to all the big stores and he'd go to like the electronics section. Be like, hey, let me see that box over there behind the glass. And you look around and be like, yeah, you know what? I'll take it. But I got a bunch of shopping to do. Will you send that up to the front? And when he was looking around, he'd snap a picture of the UPC symbol with his phone. Mm-hmm. And then he'd be able to send that to somebody who'd print out, or he would already have pre-printed other UPCs. So when they brought it up to the front, he'd be like, hey, did they send over the right one? And he'd stick the other one on the back. Gosh. So he'd end up getting like a $1,000 camera for like $100.
Slick, crazy.
Yeah. I think he eventually ended up selling his pain meds from one of his one of his many accidents. Yeah. And then the last time I heard from him, he was walking around his backyard with a shotgun saying something like, I'm not too drunk to have one of these or something. I'm like, yeah, man. So glad I stopped talking to you when I was 18 years old.
Well, here's a throwback story that I personally lived through, and I can tell you this because we kind of are on this subject. And this was how I used to get beer in small town Tennessee, being a high schooler. This is not any advice to any young people out there, but when I was growing up, we would go into your chain grocery store, and this was right when they started the U-Scan stuff. Like this U-Scan, which is now normal everywhere, was just showing up. And so that was a little bit part of it, but still not so much of it. What we used to do is you go in to your grocery store. You already knew the bathroom, so you had the bathroom scoped out, and you have to get into the stall of the bathroom with a 12-pack of beer, a 12-pack of big brand cola, and a super glue. And
you swap them?
So yes, we would sit there and pretend we were taking dumps. We'd have a lookout guy, and we'd be swapping beers and sodas in the 12-packs and super gluing it shut, and then going out none for no one would know the difference. And I mean, that plan was beautiful, like for a long time. It took a lot of work and going in there for like 45 minutes, swapping beers. But I'll tell you the way it stopped, right? So one time I'm going and I hand my pack of soda to the cashier, and he runs it across the scanner, and the cardboard grabs onto the scanner and rips open, and 12 beers come rolling down the conveyor belt right in front of me. And he goes, oh man, you're the guy who's been doing this? You better get the hell out of here.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I love it.
I was like, all right. And I was out, and I never did it again. Did it again. But yeah, he was like, you're the one who's been doing this. You better get out of here, man.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I worked at the gas station when I was a kid, and this one college kid started working there. It was just laid back, super nice guy. And he said that there's one liquor store that's a little lax with the carding. So I used to go with him after work, And then a couple of times I would meet him to go into the store. And the whole plan was that I would go in with all of his friends who were 21. I was 17 at the time. And they would hand me all the booze and all the cash. And I would go up to the counter, and when they'd ask for the ID, like, they'd see all of them who's there 4 days a week, and they'd be like, oh, hey, what's up, guys? And they'd never ask. So I went in by myself a couple times. Like, time number 3, we're standing in line, and the guy's like, hey, do you have your ID? And I was like, I'm so sorry, I don't have it with me. But you remember me, right? I'm here with Dave all the time. And they're like, yeah, but like, no ID. And it's a husband and wife, both with thick accents. And the wife looks at my friend and she goes, your shirt. And he's like, yeah? She goes, Sepultura. That's a Brazilian band. And these people are in their 40s. This is the 90s. And he's like, yeah, they're fucking awesome. I'm like, yeah, honestly, they are. Their band changed my life. We both play guitar. We love them. They're like, oh, we're Brazilian. You guys are fine. That was it. So that was so I would go around.
So then they didn't care.
No. I think they thought I was 21, but they're like, oh, you're cool. You're one of us or something.
So then, yeah.
So I would go around my senior year of high school and like take everybody's order. And then I'd go after school.
Yeah.
And there was a police department annex next door. So I walk out one time.
So you'd have to walk past cops all the time.
I had a weird childhood, so we won't get into the cop part of it. But I had a '79 Camaro that was just it was rust in the shape of a Camaro, pretty much. And I had parked it, and a cop parked right behind me. And as I'm out with 2 bagfuls of booze, and I was just like, well, there's only 2 things that could possibly happen. He's there for me, or he's not.
Right.
So I was like, well, if he is there for me, what could I do to make myself look the least suspicious? So I walk right out of the liquor store. I open the trunk of my car, put the booze in the trunk, I close it. I walk over and I was like, hey, excuse me, officer. Sorry, I'm not really from around here. Is there an ATM that's like this bank? Because like that one charges like a whole bunch of money. He goes, I don't know. And he goes back to writing, and I'm just like,
he's not
here for me. Got my Camaro. That classic like.
Instead of you like walking out trying to be like sneaking, he's like,
no, walk out there with confidence.
What?
Yeah.
I didn't notice that kid till just now.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Because what 17-year-old would be dumb enough to bother a cop when you have beer? But there was that moment, anybody that's driven old cars knows, like, you pump the gas 3 times, and you go for the gas, and you turn the crank, and please not this time. Please not this time. I'm like, okay, thank God, let's go.
Oh, man. Yeah, what was your first car?
I think I was still 15, and I bought a Pontiac Grand Am?
Grand Am?
Yeah, the smaller, like, 4-door boxy ones.
Man, I remember those cars.
And then a friend borrowed it and crashed it. So I had, like, this beat-up thing, and then we may or may not have allegedly been running from the cops and slid on ice, and so that was gone. And then I got a '79 Camaro that was my favorite. Oh my gosh! And that thing, everything was falling off. Like at one point, I'm driving down the road one time, and the seat breaks, and now I'm like in the back seat, and I'm like, what the hell? And like it just snapped. So I put like. I had like the window scraper, so I jammed that behind the seat. And that was fine until it eventually worked its way through the seat and was poking.
And then it's so then I just... Something stabbing me in the kidney.
Yeah. And one of my friends is like, oh, I got this, and jams a milk crate behind the seat. I was like, oh, that's beautiful. I'm driving down the street one time, and the wipers just die. So I grabbed a squeegee, and I'm like driving down the road like a squeegee. And then I went to fix it. It was going to be like $300 in parts to fix it. And I'm like, I don't have $300 to do this. So I took out the wiper motor. And so now the wipers were like flopping around. So I'm like, all right, well, let me tie some rope around it so I can just pull it. But the rope like disintegrates immediately because it's soaking wet. And I'm in the car and I was like, well, what can we do to replace the rope? What is like rope but won't fall apart in water? And I went, shoelaces! Give me your fucking shoelaces. And the kid in the passenger seat is like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I'll buy you new ones. And he takes the shoelaces off and we tie them the car, and we're driving down the road with the windows cranked. Pull, pull, pull. And then a friend of mine borrows it, slams the door, and shatters the driver window. And this was not his fault. The other car incident was definitely their fault. This was not. It was just the window was slightly off track and everything.
Yeah.
And I obviously couldn't afford to fix the window, so I would just drive. I'd have like an extra jacket that I would put on the left side of me in rainstorms, and I would just be pulling the shoelaces, driving with my knees down the street.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. I've told that story before, and people have looked at me dead in the eye and been like, "You're lying. That never happened."
No, that's not. You're not. I know that sounds crazy, but you're not the first person I've heard use something like a rope to try to rig up their windshield wipers. So no, my first vehicle was a hand-me-down. It was actually a really cool vehicle. It was a 1990 Grand Wagoneer. Do you remember those Jeep Grand Wagoneers? They had the wood paneling, just like the room here. They had the wood paneling down. So my grandfather...
They were not good vehicles.
No, my grandfather, he bought one new every year up to 90. And then he gave that 90 to my mom, and then she gave it to me as my first car. And yeah, it was a terrible vehicle because it was solid. Well, it was solid steel, but it literally got 6 to 8 miles a gallon of gasoline. So I never wanted to drive anywhere. And I remember messing around with... just being a kid in it, messing around with like trying to put a tape with a CD, Discman, play CDs and like listen to Godsmack on there. And I'm trying to mess with it, and all of a sudden I look up and there's a dude in like the Camaro. It's kind of funny, like a 90s Camaro at a flat stop. And man, I plowed into him going like 25 miles an hour at a dead stop with this Grand Wagoneer. And he literally was sitting in his trunk, Bob, because it just folded like in a quarter. He was perfectly fine, but it just hit him, and he folded where he was basically sitting in his trunk. But yeah, that was my first vehicle, was the old Grand Wagoneer Woody. Man, that thing, 8 miles a gallon.
I used to love racing. I always loved cars. I was kind of good at it, especially compared to like your average dude thinks they're a good driver until they actually are on a course or something. Like I could hold my own.
Until they're around other good drivers.
Right, yeah. Like I could definitely hold my own with all that stuff. I loved it so much, and I never really realized like how far I went until I think I was like, it was probably like 22 or something, and I had like family members in the car, and I'm driving the speed limit, and it's like starting to snow. We go to take a left-hand turn, just around the bend. And the car just goes straight, it must have been black ice. So, I pump the e-brake, and, I do the Swedish flick, and the car just drifts around the corner. I wasn't a drifter, but I always did this stuff in the snow. And everybody in the car freezes, and they're like, what the fuck just happened? And I'm
but you made it into nothing, basically.
Yeah, I was like, well, it's slippery out, so you got to compensate with the back. And they're like, why would you know how to do that? They're like, well, guys, remember when I used to use the car when I was 16 when it snowed? I would go to a big parking lot
and do this.
Yes.
Because
it was fun. And guess what that taught me? How to not crash a car in the snow.
That's so invaluable. And that's one of the things I did growing up. I'm not going to lie, my dad would let me, he had this old Ford red manual F-150, and it was a beater truck, and it was an 80s model, and I was like 14, and I had a friend that lived like a half a mile from the house, and it would be like Saturday night, and I'm like, I want to go hang out with my friend, and my dad's like, well, screw it, you've been practicing in the parking lot, go over there and drive to him tonight. And that was all good till one night when I was backing out of my friend's driveway, and I just heard this giant crunch, and I just booked it. I didn't turn around, and he's like, my friend called the next day, hey, my neighbor said they got hit and run last night. Do you know anything about it? I was like, no. And so that was like a guilty thing, but I was like, I'm 14. They'll throw me in jail. What am I going to do? I'm not supposed to drive.
Yeah.
My dad was giving me the car.
I used to get pulled over a lot as a kid, mostly because I was the poor kid living with my grandparents in the rich town, in the one or two poor streets in the rich town type of thing. But like the only two or three times in my life I've ever been pulled over, and they didn't ask for the license. I think out of all the times, there was like a handful, and they were mostly when I was under 16. Because a couple, one of my friends used to say, you don't need a license to drive, you need a license to get pulled over.
Yeah.
And it was just the worst one was I was in this middle of the woods, and we're going down the hill, and a car is right on my ass. And so I speed up, and, all of a sudden, like, right back on my ass. And the guy in the passenger seat was older, and I was like, oh, man, this guy keeps riding my ass. Like, I'll speed up a little more. And now I'm doing, like, 50 in the backwoods. And I was like, hey, man, I'm going to pull over and let this guy go. Whoever this is, like, I don't want to race tonight. Like, I don't have a license. Like, we're both, there's weed in the car, like, whatever else. And I pull over, and it's a cop. And he rolls over, and I was just like,
What were you doing?
what do I say to get me out of this? And I was just like, you're a cop? I didn't know who it was. I thought there was somebody riding my ass, and they kept speeding. You're making me so nervous. And I don't know this. Like, he was like, I'm sorry. You were
Really?
speeding. I'm like, of course I was speeding. I was scared. Why were you doing that? And he's like, I'm sorry. Get home safe. And he pulls away, and my friend's like, wow. That's not how I thought that was going to end. And I'm like, me either. Let's go home.
It's like that's like the scene from Fear and Loathing where he gets pulled over by Gary Busey, and it's like, how is he going to get out of this?
Yeah.
You just got to go crazy, I guess, sometimes.
Well, look, I think it's time to end it, because if we keep telling stories, I'm going to tell one where somebody I
And
knew
we're not
back in the
supposed to
day is going to be like,
probably
that was you. And
Talk
like,
about it, yeah.
yeah, so Retro Tech, obviously, people would find you there, but also your new podcast with Lewis is just on Zez Retro?
Yes, it's on Zez Retro. We'll probably do a couple of like once every 10 episodes on my channel just to be bigger and kind of have like a show off every once in a while, hoorah, to try to get some more people. But for the most part, we're going to do it over there on Zez Retro.
And definitely, the first one was on Zez Retro too,
yes,
right?
And all of them are up to this
You gotta
point.
you have to watch that one. You have to.
Now wait, that's not
watch
the
or
cathode.
listen.
These are, so there's Lewis, the Zez, he does a podcast himself with other creators from the community. He's had a couple other guys on there. And then we do the Cathode Ray podcast. So the one you're talking about with the stories is the Zezcast, like number 2 or 3, that says Steve from RetroTech. And then after that, we've had, to this point, 4 episodes of the actual Cathode Ray podcast.
Cool. All right. So definitely check those out. They're available on all audio podcast services. So
yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Same as this. Like, if you don't need to sit in front of YouTube and watch it, I think Lewis shares the same attitude that I do, is he doesn't really give a shit where you watch or listen, as long as you watch or listen. So pick whatever's the easiest for you. I'll have obviously links to everything. And your Patreon is something that I have benefited from that so often, while also pissing off every one of your other Patreon subscribers, because you do this thing where you will post on your Patreon when you find good deals on stuff.
Yeah.
And occasionally you found things that I've been looking for years. So I'll get the notification, I'll click the link, buy it, and then after I buy it, I'll go back to the Patreon post, and there's like 7 people like, what the fuck, it's already gone. So like,
I try
sorry,
to tell,
not sorry.
Yeah, I try to tell people, like, if it's, so here's the thing, if it's made it to the point where I've posted it, that means a lot of times it's me just posting it when I find it. A lot of times, though, it's me sitting there for 20 minutes hovering over the buy it now for myself.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, okay, I'm not going to buy this one. Let's share it to somebody else. But I'm like, at the same time, I'm always like that with this stuff. If you see it, just like anything now, if you see it, it's in stock and you want it, you need to get it.
Well, I will say, and I will brag on behalf of the other awesome members of the retro gaming community, not me for this one, but 3 of 3 that I did that. I think all 3 times I snatched it up immediately, all became something. And the number one that I would love to talk about is Martin's 68X.
Yeah.
So I sniped that. Other people were pissed that I grabbed it before them, but me sniping it first is what allowed the clone card to happen. Because generally speaking, the stuff that I get is rarely for me. It's for bigger projects and stuff like that. One of the other ones I'll tell you about as soon as we're off. Sorry, I just don't want to. Same thing, part shortages. I don't want to get everybody hyped for something that might not happen for a year, but that's midway through too, and it was some of the stuff. So if I've sniped it underneath you in his Patreon, I promise it's going to better things. Promise.
And that's just, again, if you see, it's like the way you get the best deals in CRTs or anything like that is to just be sitting there and almost not be looking for it. It's like, be ready when it comes available to just buy it and be like, that's within my budget or less than what I had planned. I don't need to think anymore about it. Yeah. It's here. And it's like you say, because these items come available, but there's differences in quality and just anything with that stuff. So usually the ones I share are either really cheap or something people are really looking for.
Yeah, or convenience. Yeah. Hey, are you in this neighborhood of Ohio?
Yes. Like, so you're in this area, you happen to be looking for a PVM, here's a great deal that I would buy if it was in my area, but it's not.
So moral of the story is subscribe to Steve's Patreon. Anyway, as always, thank you for everybody who's watching and listening. Thank you for inviting me over and putting up with all this. So,
cheers,
everybody.